July is here, so now it is time to hit the ground running and start talking a little bit more about teaching and technology. This is Nicole with Dear Teacher Instructional Coaching. So all of June was about self-care, and June should always be only about self-care. We need that time to reset, to shut off, to try to turn off teacher mode and really take care of ourselves as human beings. And now that we've kind of reserved an entire month for that, it is time to move forward and now get back to the nitty-gritty of things. So today, I'm going to talk to you about curriculum reflection and then revamping. So hopefully your district has like a curriculum map as far as an umbrella of what the entire year sort of looks like, whether that's based on theme and what standards are within that, or if your standards, like in science, if they're already sort of set up, like with cells and human body and those kinds of things, you've already got your topic with your standards that go along with it. If you are like the language arts department, where we usually have like a topic or theme for a unit, and then there's, reading standards, writing standards, vocab, speaking and listening, we have all of those incorporated into one big unit. So hopefully you have your kind of outlook map of the school year. If your district doesn't have that in place, that is going to be imperative for your school to get that going and accomplished in the coming year. However, I only want you to focus, when we're doing this curriculum reflection, I only want you focusing on the first quarter. It can be tempting to look at the entire school year, and it's fine to have like your sketch with that curriculum map, but that's what everybody's doing. That's the standards everybody's hitting and when everybody is hitting it. But how you present that information to your students and how you teach and the materials that you use with that is hopefully completely and totally up to you as the classroom teacher. So thinking of quarter one, what went well? What didn't you like about it? So for me, my situation was a little bit different because I entered a new district this year. So I didn't want to shake the tree too terribly much, at least at the very beginning. So kind of had to, know my role a little bit and get comfortable with everybody. And the year started with lots of short stories. So yes, we had, our writing standards in there, and then, reviewing a lot of stuff with plot and characters, point of view, that kind of thing. And it was fine. Like, the kids got the standards. I didn't do a bad job, but I just felt like, it felt to me like the negative side of doing all of those short stories was, I felt like there was no culminating purpose or point besides we got to check this off our list. That's what it felt like to me. I'm also, and this is like my own problem as a teacher, I'm not a huge fan of doing a ton of short stories. When I like to do short stories is when my students are going to write a narrative. Because I don't want them writing a novel, I want them writing a short story. So I give them short stories and we talk about the structure and we work through that when we get to writing a narrative. So I thought, why am I using all of these short stories, and this story is about, theme and point of view, and with this story it's about point of view and conflict. And I'm like, I just feel like there was no real cohesiveness to it. And then there wasn't any kind of final result that the kids pushed out. So I didn't really care for how I personally taught those specific standards. What I did like about starting with short stories is all of my students were reading the same thing. And so then that helped with discussions and conversations, and it helped me learn more about them as human beings. And I really enjoyed that part of it, and reviewing those concepts was important, and I'm happy that we kind of ease them into their 7th grade year, reviewing things. So how can you take, looking at kind of that Q1, how can we take this reflection and do something different with it? So when you're doing this reflection, there's a couple of things I want you to keep in mind. As you're reflecting and thinking about the good and the bad, you do not have to write that stuff down. A lot of what I'm saying right now, I have said to my colleagues and my very close friends. And I've talked this through a little bit about what I liked, what I didn't like. They asked me questions to kind of get my mind thinking a little bit more. And when you're doing the evaluation part of it, you don't have to write that down. But if you're like a pro-con list kind of person, go ahead and make a pro and con list. That's fine. When you get to the point of making the new plan, that's when you got to start putting pen to paper or typing it, whatever your preference is on that. So new plan must be written down. Talking about what was good or bad doesn't need to be. But the new stuff, you got to write down, because I guarantee you once August rolls around, you should be able to just pull this out and be prepped and ready to go. So you got to make sure you're getting that stuff written down. The other thing I want to say about doing this curriculum planning is when I'm talking about the start of the year, the first 2 weeks I block off. Like, that's not when I'm going to start intense content. So I'm probably going to do a PBL, start with a little bit of personalized learning, as that is my goal. This is the first year our kids have iPads after having laptops. So there's going to be, I'm giving myself the time to we're going to do some playing around with that. I'm sure there's going to be some information from the district that I'm going to have to give our students. So I like to block off, we'll start on like a Wednesday. So then I do that Wednesday through Friday, and then the whole following next week, we're not going to really dive real deep into anything to do with content. I need to establish expectations and routines and relationships, and that, relationships obviously develop throughout the entire course of the year, but you got to get that started and get that going and get to know your students. And so some of the activities and things that I do with that, there's no grades or anything like that that's taken in those first 10 days, 7 to 10 days of class. So 2 weeks, block that off. When I'm talking Q1 and content starting and my first true unit, that's the part that I'm evaluating right now. So I started thinking about this. What was really good about the start of the year? Well, like I just said, the community of it, everybody reading the same thing, it was really actually enjoyable because they were reviewing those concepts. What I didn't like about it was I felt like there was no end game, there was no real purpose. We weren't driving towards a specific goal. It felt like we were just checking something off the list. So, how can I take and keep the good stuff and then solve the problem of the other thing? So one way I could do that is do my narrative right away. If you teach middle school, I would not do narrative right away. I enjoy teaching narrative. I feel like I have a really good grasp on how to do it, so I can get them to produce things that are really good. But sometimes they can, you've got a World War II setting, but yet they're on cell phones, and then there's bombs, and then there's dinosaurs, and you're like, where are you? What are you doing in this narrative? So I feel like launching right into that might be kind of challenging. The other part about starting with narrative is some students really, really enjoy doing narrative writing because they are naturally creative people. And so it comes kind of almost naturally to them. In my experience, for the vast majority of students, narrative creative writing is very challenging. So I would start with putting in some informative stuff. So for example, we do like synthesis charts, T-charts for compare and contrast, summary writing, and those all should be review for my students in their 7th grade year. That should be, touch point on it. We're going to practice a few times, and then we're going to move forward and start making things. We're going to build on these paragraphs that you have been used to writing. So I would recommend doing something that your students are more familiar with, like informative writing. And so that can be something as simple as explain the theme. And so, they start with their topic sentence. The theme is they have their evidence and explanation, and then their clincher or summarizing sentence. And that's just how I do like very simple basic paragraph form. So that's something that my students have been doing since they were in elementary school. So I'm very lucky that way, that they have a pretty good grasp on writing skills and informative writing. So I want that piece incorporated. So I'm like, I'm not going to keep the short stories and add narrative. I feel like that's a bad call. I think what would be better is doing a whole class novel. And I have chosen the novel A Long Walk to Water. And so there's a few reasons behind doing that. We can do, so a lot of people when they do A Long Walk to Water, they'll do an empathy walk. That's nice to do in the fall when it's still nice outside. You're not guaranteed anything with that in the springtime in North Dakota. So fall, usually we're pretty good. So I could do that empathy walk at the beginning of the year with them. The other thing is a novel hits all of those review terms. And the cool part about A Long Walk to Water is you have the parallel plot structure. And it's cool because the kids eventually understand. So we end up plotting out Naya and Selva's journeys. And so we have this like straight line where they're parallel, so the kids understand parallel structure. And then by the end of it, they realize the whole time it hasn't been going like this, it's been going like this, because eventually they meet. Spoiler alert, Naya and Selva's paths cross eventually at the end of the book. And then the kids are just like totally blown away, and we talk about how like the author, then we reflect back and like how she put in clues and bits and pieces and those kinds of things. So I can hit all of those standards that I need to. We'll all be reading the same thing. There's different activities where I can get us outside still and get them active and in nature. There's also opportunity for me to be doing all of that other informative writing that we had in our curriculum map at the beginning of the year. The synthesis chart, the T-chart, the summary writing, the informative paragraph, all of those can be incorporated in there. And if you have, like, for example, informational standards, reading informational text besides just reading literature, there's all kinds of stuff that's out there that can be attached with specifically A Long Walk to Water. And for example, there is, we've had a couple of girls who have, run track, and they're track stars, and their story has been in our local newspaper. And their journey from Ethiopia, I believe, is where they came. And there's also another story called The Lost Boys, and it is their journey to our city, to Fargo, North Dakota. And so it's kind of cool because they have that experience. And if you want to start involving like community and having speakers come in and those kinds of things, like all of that kind of connection stuff that can be really impactful for students at the very beginning of the year. So that is my solution to and what I'm going for as far as my plan. Now, the funny part for me is I also want personalized learning in there. So I got like all these goals going on right now. But I'm thinking of Q1 in its entirety, because in language arts, there is so much that we need to cover. And I'd rather have, like a big text, like a mentor text, and then we add other pieces to start the school year. And I think it's important to try to think of ways that you can keep your kids relatively active, because they probably have been. I know that this summer isn't typical as far as all of the sporting events or activities that kids are supposed to be involved in or are typically involved in, but there's no way that all of these kids are sitting inside on the couch. It's not a thing. And so easing them back in and being able to find experiences and ways to have them go outside. How can you connect with the community? What are some of those types of things that you can do to keep the students engaged with the stuff that you're working on? And then eventually I visualize how I'm going to have them demonstrate to me. We're going to do a type of PBL project at the end that's connected with this. So to me, there's also that final assessment that is connected, and I'm not just checking things off a list. So that's my solution as far as how I did my curriculum reflection. So block off those first, whatever week and a half or 2 weeks or whatever you've got going on, and take that time. I'll talk more about the first 2 weeks and ideas for what you should do in the first 2 weeks, but set that time aside and only think about quarter one. And how are you going to progress? What's going to be the final thing that you want them to know and be able to do? How are they going to prove that to you? Make that plan. Consider when you reflect, what did you like about how you started the year? What was the good stuff and not the good lessons? Don't try to think about that, because what worked last year may not work with this batch of kids this year. So what were the overarching aspects that you like? Did you like that there was a sense of community? Or maybe that's something that you needed to work on and you're like, I felt like I didn't get to know my kids until after Christmas. Okay, well then we got a problem. We gotta do something more at the beginning of the year. So really take the time and reflect on not your lessons, but the overall, what did you like about how you started or how you had quarter one going, and what did you feel just wasn't quite great? Remember, just because you're changing things and just because you want to do better doesn't mean what you did last year was bad. My kiddos learned. They are proficient. They are ready for 8th grade. I did my job, and I did a dang good job. But I'm going to try to do better, and I'm going to try to do some different things, because I need to learn too. That's why I'm in education, because I love to learn, and so I need to model that practice for my students as well. So reflect, take the time, what went well, what didn't, how can you keep the stuff you liked, and how can you find solutions to the stuff that you didn't. Map it out. Dear teacher, you can do it. With love, Nicole.